Have you ever wondered if the nightmares you carried from childhood were never dreams at all, but memories of something that really stood beside your bed? Imagine being 9 years old, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on your ceiling when a shadow in the corner refuses to move with the trees outside. Imagine your little sister whispering about a man in the closet who talks to her at night. Imagine hearing the sound of nails dragging across your floorboards, stopping right beside your bed, and finding fresh scratches in the morning that no one believes you made. These are not campfire stories. These are scars burned into the minds of children who grew up knowing something unholy wanted their attention. Welcome to The Price Paid, where nightmares become stories, and stories become proof that the unknown is closer than you think. If you dare to keep watching, subscribe now, because tonight, the whispers in your closet may finally call your name. When I was around 9 years old, my world was small and simple. A quiet neighborhood where kids rode their bikes in the warm evenings. And the biggest worry should have been finishing homework before the streetlights came on. My mom, my younger sister, and I lived in a modest old house at the end of a street. It had chipped paint on the porch, a creaky front door, and floorboards that groaned whenever you stepped too hard. My mom always said old houses made noises, and I tried to believe her. But some sounds do not feel like wood expanding or pipes shifting in the walls. Some sounds feel deliberate, like something alive is waiting in the silence. That is what I began to learn in that house. The first time I knew something was wrong was one restless night when I could not sleep. I pulled the blanket to my chin and stared at the glowing stars stuck to my ceiling, the kind that fades slowly until the room becomes pitch black. I remember my eyes wandering to the shadows on the walls, cast by the trees swaying outside my window. The branches moved with the wind, stretching and bending, their shadows dancing across the plaster. But one shadow was different. It stayed still while the others shifted. It crouched low in the corner near my toy chest. I told myself it was just a pile of clothes or one of my stuffed animals, but the longer I stared, the more I felt it was staring back. I blinked, and suddenly, it was gone. The air turned cold, not like the chill of an open window, but a deep cold that seemed to crawl from the inside of my chest outward. I hid under the blanket until sleep pulled me under. When I woke the next morning, I had nearly forgotten about it, until my eyes landed on the toy chest. It was standing wide open. I never left it that way because my mom would scold me if toys spilled out. My stomach twisted, but I shut the lid and said nothing. Weeks later, my sister, only 5 years old at the time, casually told my mom that she did not like the man in her closet. My heart nearly stopped when she said it, as if she were talking about a doll or a cartoon. My mom brushed it off saying little kids imagine things, but I knew from the look on my sister's face that she was serious. She said he stood in her closet at night and whispered to her, though she could not make out the words. That night, my mom tucked her in and even said a prayer with her, but she never checked the closet. I did not sleep easily. That same night, I woke to the sound of something dragging across the floor of my room. It was a slow scraping, like nails raking across the wood, inching closer and closer to where I lay frozen in bed. The sound stopped directly beside me. I was terrified that if I looked over the edge, I would see eyes staring back. I clenched the blanket until exhaustion made me collapse into uneasy sleep. In the morning, I found long, fresh scratches carved into the floor right beside my bed. I ran to show my mom, but she only grew angry, saying I must have been dragging furniture or playing with something sharp. I swore I had not, but she did not believe me. The nights became heavier after that. Whispers crept out of the closet like faint static from a broken radio. My sister would cry out from her room, pointing at the corner and screaming that he was there. I never saw him, but I believed her. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, the kind of sensation that makes the hair on your arms rise even when the room is warm. The worst night came in the dead of winter. I woke to find my bedroom door open, even though I always shut it. Down the hallway, the nightlight my mom left on for us flickered and went out. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, patting down the hall until they stopped right outside my door. I could not breathe. The door creaked, and a tall, dark figure leaned in, its head pushing through the gap. I shut my eyes tight, pretending to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed, and I was alone. In the morning, my mom denied ever coming in. My sister whispered that the man had stood by her bed again. That day, for the first time, my mom looked worried. She lit a candle and said prayers in every room of the house. For a while, things were quiet, and I dared to hope it was over. But peace does not last in a house like that. One afternoon, I came home from school before my mom. I sat on the couch, scribbling homework, when I heard the sound of my toy chest slamming shut from down the hall. My blood froze. Nobody else was home. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but when I walked to my room, the door stood wide open. The toy chest was shut tight, but every toy I owned was scattered across the floor, as if someone had dumped them out in anger. I backed away slowly and waited on the porch until my mom came home. She told me the cat must have knocked things over. We did not have a cat. Years later, after we moved out, I asked my mom if she had ever experienced anything herself. She hesitated before admitting that sometimes she woke to see a shadow standing in her doorway. She said she never told us because she did not want to scare us, but she believed something was wrong with that house. She thought it was a man, someone who had lived there long ago. She never said much more. Even as an adult, the memory of that house makes my stomach turn. I can still feel the chill, the weight of being watched, the whispers from the closet. It was not a child's imagination, it was something real. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I swear I can still hear nails dragging across the floor, searching for me again. When I turned 10, my life shifted again. My mom had remarried, and we moved into a larger house, the kind of place that was supposed to symbolize a fresh start. It was newer than our old one, tucked inside a quiet neighborhood, lined with tall trees and long driveways. I told myself this would be the house where everything felt normal, where I could finally sleep without feeling like someone was watching. At first, it seemed like that might be true. The rooms were bigger, the walls freshly painted, and my new bedroom sat at the very end of the hallway with 2 large windows that overlooked the backyard. The closet was deeper than the one before. I thought that meant more space for toys and clothes. I did not realize it meant more space for something else. The first night I slept there, I woke around midnight to a soft rustling inside the closet. It was not a loud crash or a door slam, just the faint brushing sound of fabric shifting, as if someone's hand was slowly sliding across the hanging clothes. I stared at the door and told myself it was the house settling. My heart thudded, but I tried to laugh quietly under the blanket, reminding myself that new houses make new noises. But then the closet door shivered, a subtle trembling like someone pressing gently from the inside. It did not swing open, but it pulsed once and went still. I wanted to run down the hall to my mom's room, but my body would not move. My eyes stayed fixed on that door until sleep finally pulled me back under. In the morning, I saw the door cracked open a sliver, even though I remembered shutting it tight. I asked my mom if she had gone in, and she shook her head, telling me maybe the air vents pushed it. But deep down, I knew it was not the air vents. That night, the sounds returned. This time it was a light tapping on the window glass. I assumed it was tree branches until I looked and realized there were no branches anywhere near the second floor windows. The tapping went on for minutes. Every time I pulled a blanket over my head, it stopped. When I peeked out again, it started up once more. It felt like a game someone was playing with me from outside. One night I finally gathered the courage to look. A pale hand was pressed against the glass from the outside. The skin was almost translucent, like old paper left in the sun. My window was high enough that no one could reach it without a ladder. But the hand stayed there, unmoving, as if it belonged to something that did not need to climb. It slowly slid down and vanished. I did not sleep at all that night. When I told my mom the next morning, she laughed. My stepdad laughed too. They tried to convince me I'd been dreaming or half asleep. But I saw the way my stepdad started keeping the hallway light on at night. Maybe he was not as sure as he pretended to be. A month later, my little brother, only 4 years old, began talking about the white lady. He said she came into his room and sat on his bed at night. My mom brushed it off as a child's imagination, until one night I heard him screaming. I ran in to find him curled under his blanket, trembling. When he calmed down, he whispered that she had been standing by his door just staring at him, her eyes completely black. I believed him because of what I had seen at my window. After that, I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every night. But the dreams did not stop. They grew worse. In my dreams, she stood in the corner of my room whispering my name, her voice dry like leaves scraping across pavement. Sometimes, when I woke up, I could still hear it faintly, as if her voice had leaked into the waking world. One night, I opened my eyes to find her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than any person I had ever seen, her head nearly brushing the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though the air was still, and her black stringy hair clung to her pale face like seaweed. Her eyes were empty holes of blackness. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. When I shut my eyes and opened them again, she was gone. My closet door stood wide open. I begged my mom to let me sleep in her room, but she said I had to be brave. Maybe she did not want to admit
nice
she was
bike you
scared
have there.
too. The worst night came during a violent storm. Heavy rain pounded the roof, and wind howled like an animal outside. I woke to the sound of my window creaking. It was slowly sliding open, even though it had been locked. I watched as the lock turned by itself, the metal twisting with a faint click. The window opened all the way, and the white lady climbed in. She did not move like a person. She floated. Her feet never touched the floor as she drifted toward my bed, bending down until her face hovered inches from mine. I felt her breath, ice cold and smelling like wet earth. She whispered my name again. This time I screamed. My mom and stepdad burst into the room, flipping on the light. The window was closed and locked, and no one else was there. They scolded me for scaring everyone, but I could see in their eyes that they were shaken. The strangest part is that I do not remember exactly what happened between seeing her face and screaming. It is like my mind blacked out, leaving only fragments of the memory. They took me to therapy for a while after that, saying it was just night terrors. We lived in that house for 3 more years. My brother stopped talking about the white lady, but I do not think it was because she stopped visiting. Sometimes I heard him crying at night, whispering for her to go away. I think he was just too afraid to tell anyone anymore. Even now, when it storms at night, I still hesitate to get up for water or use the bathroom. I glance at corners, making sure nothing tall is lurking there. People can call it imagination or night terrors, but I saw the hand on my window before my brother ever mentioned her. Some things are not so easily explained. When I was 8, the world felt like a map of sidewalks and tree-lined streets. Every day after school, I rode my bike, learning every crack in the pavement, every bend in the curb. My routine became a ritual. The quiet hum of tires against cement, the click of the chain as I pedaled faster. On my block, there was one house I liked more than the rest. A house with a long driveway and a wide lawn. The kind of house where you imagine families drinking lemonade on the porch in summer. Most afternoons, an older man stood at the end of that driveway. He always wore the same hat and stayed exactly where the concrete met the sidewalk. He would wave at me, call out a greeting, then go back to watching the street like a sentinel. I never crossed the street because my mother had a strict rule about not crossing without her. The man seemed to understand this.
It is okay, my dear.
He would call to me from his place and ask about school or my bike. He once made a joke about a cat that made me laugh out loud as I pedaled past. Our conversations were short, always from his driveway to the curb. Somehow, though, he knew little details about my life without me ever telling him. He asked about my little brother. He commented on my father's new car. I assumed he had seen us from a distance, like any neighbor might. Then one day I got a brand new bike, bright red with a shiny bell. As I rolled by, he called out, "Nice bike," and asked if I wanted to race to the corner. I told him no because my mom would be angry. He smiled and said, "One day." After that, our chats continued. He told me about a bird that perched on his fence and a dog that used to return a lost slipper every morning. He sounded like someone who had spent his life noticing small things. I started looking for him whenever I rode, expecting his figure at the driveway. Some afternoons he was there. Sometimes he was not. Then one week he simply stopped coming out. I rode past the house and saw no one. The curtains in the front window were closed. The driveway felt empty without him. I wanted to ask my mother if I could cross the street to see what had happened, but she said no. She repeated her warning about roads not being safe for kids alone. A few days later, I saw a woman in the backyard of that house. She had her hair tied back and held a watering can. I had never seen anyone else in that yard before. I slowed my bike so she would not notice me too close. I wanted to call out like I always did, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shyness. Maybe it was the fear of breaking my mom's rule. Another day, I saw the woman again, this time on the back porch, holding a mug. She opened a small side door and went around the house. I pedaled to the corner and waited where the sidewalk curved. I looked down the street to make sure my mom was not outside. Then, heart racing, I decided to cross. I pushed my pedals hard, darting across the road like my life depended on it. Up close, the house looked bigger, its windows dark and heavy like eyes. The driveway sloped downward to the street. I stopped at the end near the back gate. The woman heard me. She turned and saw a small boy with a red bike standing there. She looked surprised, but not angry. She came to the gate and opened it, asking what I was doing. I told her about the man on the driveway, how he used to say hi every afternoon and knew my name. I told her he had said he would race me one day. She wiped her hands on her dress, as though she had been working, and said the man I described sounded like her husband. I smiled, thinking she would say he was inside or on a trip, but she did not smile. She said he had died the year before. She said his name was Harold, and he had died in his chair. Something cold opened in my chest. I asked her if she had a picture of him. She went inside and came back with a small frame. It showed a man with the same hat and the same broad smile, but there was a thin, pale scar running from his ear to his mouth. The man I had seen had no scar. His face had been round and smooth. The hat matched. The smile matched, but the scar did not. I told her I once saw him rub his cheek, but never a scar. She said the scar had been there for decades, hidden sometimes under stubble but never gone. She repeated that her husband had died and no one else lived in the house. She said she had moved back last summer to tend the garden and had never seen or heard anyone standing in the driveway. My heart pounded in my ears. I thanked her and backed down the driveway. I did not look back into the yard. The bike ride home felt like the drive after a near accident when you turn off the radio and sit in silence. My mom did not ask any questions when I came in. She just told me to be careful. That night, I could not sleep. I thought about the man with the hat, about his laugh, and the way he said my name. I thought about the scar in the photograph. The next day I rode past the house. The curtains were open, sunlight spilling onto the porch and driveway. No one stood there. I waved from the corner, but no one waved back. I pedaled away. For a while, nothing else happened. I tried to forget. I changed my routes. I spent time with other kids. Weeks passed. Then one rainy night I woke to hear my name being called. It sounded like someone outside near my window. The voice was familiar. It said my name the way the man across the street used to. My head spun. Over the patter of raindrops, I heard it again, soft but deliberate. I shouted for my mother and dove under the covers. She rushed in and sat by my bed. I told her about the voice. She rubbed my back and said it was the wind. To calm me, she went to the window and lifted the blinds. She said no one was out there. My father got up and checked the locks, shining a flashlight outside. They insisted there was no one. When I swore I had heard a voice, they said I must have dreamed it. The next morning, my throat ached from shouting. My friends at school laughed when I told them, saying I believed in ghosts. One dared me to stand in the driveway of that house at night and call the man's name. I refused. Days passed. Nothing happened. The street changed over the years. Houses were sold. The woman's house stood empty for a while. Then new people moved in. The long driveway stayed, but with different cars. I rode past and did not look for a man in a hat. I grew older, learned the names of new neighbors, new dogs. At 18, I moved away for college. My parents sold the house. But the memory of that man sits like a stone in my chest. I still wonder why I did not ask the woman for more pictures. Why I did not tell her everything I remembered. Why I did not cross the street again. I was 8. I was scared. A few years ago, I drove down that block just to see it. A child rode a bike near the corner. The driveway was empty. For a moment, I wanted to stop and ask if anyone had stood there and said hi. If anyone else had heard a voice in the rain. I wanted an answer that would close the gap. But I kept driving. The memory stayed as it was, and I try my best to suppress it even now. Looking back on those years, I realized that what haunted me was not just the shadows, the whispers, or the figures at the edge of my vision. What truly lingers is the silence that followed whenever I tried to tell someone. Each time I spoke, the answers were the same. Old houses creak, dreams are confusing, children imagine things. But I knew, and deep down they probably knew too, that what I described did not come from my imagination. In the first house, the shadows were not simply tricks of the trees. The scratches carved into the floor beside my bed were not the result of clumsy games. My sister was too young to invent the man in her closet, too innocent to fake the terror that filled her eyes. Even my mother, who insisted on brushing away our fears, finally admitted years later that she had seen something herself. She described the shape that sometimes stood silently in her doorway, watching. She had kept that secret, not out of disbelief, but out of fear of what acknowledging it might mean. The second house was supposed to be our fresh start. It was supposed to be brighter, cleaner, safer. Yet from the moment I heard the rustling in the closet and the tapping on the glass, I knew the darkness was still with us. The white lady, with her chalk skin and endless black eyes, was not the type of presence a child imagines for fun. My brother was too small to conspire with me, too small to understand how fear takes root. And yet he described her the same way, felt her presence the same way. We lived there for 3 long years, carrying the burden of nights where every shadow could be her. My parents, desperate to keep control, told themselves and us that these were night terrors. But it was impossible to mistake the sound of a lock turning by itself, the sight of a pale hand sliding down a second-floor window, the feeling of cold breath hovering over your face. Then there was the man in the hat. He was different. Unlike the figures in my rooms, he was not confined to a closet or a corner of the house. He stood in daylight, at the end of a driveway, and he spoke. He knew my name. He laughed. He made me feel, for a time, that he was just a neighbor who liked to watch the street. But the truth was darker. He had been dead for a year, and the man I saw did not match the scarred face in the photograph his wife showed me. He was something else. And years later, when I heard his voice calling my name outside my window in the rain, I realized he had never really left. All of these stories are separate, yet they feel connected by the same thread. They are the shadows that children see, but adults deny. They are the presence in the room when the lights go out, the cold draft that does not come from any window, the weight of being watched when you are supposed to be alone. As children, we are told that monsters are not real. But what if the reason children see them more often is because they are not yet conditioned to dismiss the impossible? Maybe what haunts us does not need belief to exist, but it thrives on attention, and children give it freely. I often wonder what it wanted. Was the man in the closet the same as the tall shadow in my room? Was the white lady a different entity, or just another form of the same darkness? Was the man in the hat ever really human, or had something else taken his shape? These are questions that will never have answers, and perhaps that is why the fear clings so tightly. Fear without resolution is the kind that does not fade. As an adult, I sometimes catch myself avoiding the same patterns. I hesitate before opening closets in strange places. I sleep with the blanket pulled to my chin, as if the thin fabric could still protect me. On stormy nights, I stare at my windows longer than necessary, checking for a pale hand pressed against the glass. Even when I tell myself I have grown, that logic and reason should rule, there is still a child inside me who knows the truth. That child remembers the sound of nails dragging across the floor, remembers the white dress that moved without wind, remembers the voice calling from the dark. People say childhood memories blur over time, that they change and distort. But mine have not softened. They remain sharp, cold, and unyielding. They are not the sort of stories you laugh about years later. They are scars. They shape me into someone who carries a constant wariness, someone who does not sleep easily, someone who knows that silence in the dark is not empty. If you ask me whether I believe in ghosts, I will not answer the way most adults do. I will not say yes or no. I will only tell you that I remember. And remembering is enough. The man in the closet, the white lady, the man in the hat, they were real in ways that cannot be dismissed. Real enough to leave me with a lifetime of unease. Real enough to convince me that some nightmares never end. They simply grow older with us. Even now, as I sit in the safety of adulthood, in a home that should be mine and mine alone, there are nights when the past creeps back. A shadow in the corner lingers too long. A creak in the hallway carries a rhythm too deliberate. A dream ends with a whisper of my name. And in those moments, I remember being 9, 10, 8 years old, powerless against something vast and unseen. I remember that the world is not as safe as we pretend it to be. Childhood is supposed to be filled with innocence, laughter, and the comfort of safety. But for some, it is marked by shadows that refuse to leave. The boy who grew up hearing nails scrape against the wooden floor of his bedroom. The child who watched a pale figure drift through a locked window. The kid who waved to a man already dead and buried all, carry scars that never fully heal. These stories are not just eerie tales of the past. They are reminders that fear is not always irrational. Sometimes it is a warning. What ties these memories together is not only the presence of something supernatural, but also the disbelief of those around them. Parents dismiss the whispers, the scratches, the voices in the dark, because it is easier to explain things away than to accept that something unknown might exist in their homes. But children know better. Their senses are unfiltered. They do not need proof. They feel it, and it marks them for life. If you ever find yourself, or someone you love, facing these moment shadows where there should be none, whispers when no one is near, the weight of being watched, you must remember that denial will not make it stop. Fear feeds on silence. Acknowledging it, confronting it, even protecting your space through ritual, prayer, or sheer defiance is better than pretending nothing is wrong. Sometimes, even speaking your fear aloud can lessen its grip. It is also important to listen. Children, especially, should never be brushed aside when they say they see or hear things that adults do not. Their fear is real, even if its source is unseen. Taking them seriously does not make the experience stronger. It gives them the comfort of not being alone. Fear is hardest to endure when no one believes you. But above all, remember this. Not every shadow is a threat. Not every whisper comes to harm. Some spirits may be lost, lingering, while others may be malevolent. The distinction is unclear, but the reaction should always be cautious respect. Do not invite them, do not provoke them, and do not ignore them entirely. The balance between fear and acknowledgement is delicate, but it is the only way to live without letting darkness consume you. The scars of childhood horror remind us that the world is larger and stranger than we pretend it to be. They tell us that the unknown does not vanish when we grow older. It simply waits, patient for the night to fall. And maybe, just maybe, what we saw as children was not imagination at all. Maybe it was a glimpse into the truth adults are too afraid to face. This is the price paid, the channel where nightmares breathe, where childhood fears walk beside us still. If you dare to keep looking into the dark, subscribe now, because the next shadow you see might not be your own.